Okay, hello everyone. This was the topic that I gave you as an activity last meeting, so I'll be briefly discussing this. I expect that you have read this already. So the topic is formulating scientific questions. So in order to know which is a good question, you have to have these characteristics. That question should be or should have real answers and often is not should not be answered by either yes or no. So your question should not start, do you believe? That's a no-no. If it's an answerable by yes or no, then that's not a good scientific question. You should have real answers. What is the effect of um, salt in the growth of plants? Are testable, so meaning you can make or you can conduct an experiment from that question in order to find the answer. Have a hypothesis, meaning you could create a tentative answer to your question that can be false, that you can that can become a negative, or that cannot be that can be unsuccessful. Just for example, what is the effect of salt in the growth of plants? It can either positively or negatively affect the growth of plants. This means that your hypothesis can be false, or it's okay that it's false, and are interesting. It should be questions that you want to know all about. Because if you don't have any heart on that question, then you won't be having any motivation to do the experiment. So here are the guidelines in looking for a writing scientific questions. A good scientific question is testable. So, for example, why is that a star? So, how can you answer? Usually, your answer is it's because of blah 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 blah. But you cannot really have a testable answer for that, as well as what are stars made up of. But if you ask what is the effect on the temperature if you place salt on an ice cream, then what will be its melting point, or what is the effect of um, fertilizer to the growth of plants. Okay, so a good scientific question can be tested by some experiment or a measurement. That's your dependent variable that you can do. For example, where does the sun come from is quite difficult to measure, right? Quite difficult to do an experiment of. It's not good as how will human skin react to solar radiation, where one participant is covered in SPF 30 sunscreen and the other participant is not covered. Or you can just compare different brands of sunscreen. Next is a good scientific question builds on what you already know. So your questions should be something that you have a knowledge about. So, for example, will fertilizer make grass grow greener? It's not that good. Whereas, what type of fertilizer will make grass grow greener? So, you already know that there are different types of fertilizer, be it organic or inorganic. So, use what you know in making your own question. Okay. A good scientific question, when answered, leads to other good question. So, your good scientific question, if you answer that, those answer can still lead to another good scientific questions. So if you ask a question, what is flu? Right? It's flu is something that is caused by bacteria. Does not lead to as many questions as uh, to this example question. How does flu attack the human immune system? What might be the effect? What might be causes? What will happen? Right? You can have a lot of questions right after that one question. That is one way to make a good scientific question. So the above questions ask what and how in a way that focuses it on the problem to be studied. Okay? So again, it should be tested. It can be tested. You can make an experiment out of it. You can measure it. It builds on what you already know, and it can lead to another good question. Those are some guidelines when you are writing a good scientific question. So, what is a testable and not testable question? A testable question can be answered by designing or conducting an experiment. A non-testable question cannot be answered by conducting an experiment. Just like, for example, why is pink the best color in the world? How can you make an experiment out of it, right? It's very difficult. Why is it pink? Because pink or that is an opinionated and different people has different opinion about what color they prefer or what the best color is. Albert Einstein was the best physician in the world. Well, this can be falsified as well because there's a lot of physicians, so you cannot really make an experiment out of this. Whereas a testable question, does Pepsi have more carbonation than Coke? But this is not really a good scientific question though, but this is testable. This is still not a good scientific question because it is answerable by yes or no. So you can restate this question. What is the effect on the carbonation between Pepsi, or how much carbonation does Pepsi has compared to Coke? And number two is, what is the effect of cigarette smoke on lung cancer? It's quite general, but you can make this something good by making it much more specific. And the growth of cancer cells, maybe. So that's it. Next, a non-scientific question is the puddle big or small? Now, when you say big or small, the big and the small words are uh, not scientific because it's based on you or on a person how they view a thing if it's big or small. So you have to restate this by changing the words big or small. Maybe you can be specific like the weight, the height, the width, the area. Okay? So non-scientific words are these, and you should avoid these words: hot or cold, big or small, a lot, a little, high or low, near or far. So maybe you can say be specific like increase in temperature, decrease in temperature. Um, Maybe hot temperature can you can say higher temperature, lower temperature, but you have to be very specific on what you're trying to know. So when you say higher, increased, but you have to be very specific what you are measuring. You can use these, but you have to be specific on what you're trying to measure. But because these words can mean differently in different types of people. Testable questions are questions that can be answered using scientific methods such as research, which is our subject, field study, experimentation. And these requires variables. You already know your variables, right? You have your dependent, independent, controlled, extraneous variables, confounding variables. So you should have your variables when you do experimental inquiry. This means that there will be varied variables, and you want to know the impact of those variables in your study. So testable questions is about changing one variable to see what is the effect on another variable. So that's experimentation. So we can do if and then statement. If we change blah blah blah, how does it affect the blank? If we change the temperature, how does it affect its the solubility or the melting time it took for an ice to melt? What happens to blank if we change blank? How does changing the amount of water affect the growth of plant? How does salt affect the growth of plant? What happens to uh, the growth of plant if we change the amount of fertilizer used, right? Or the type of fertilizers used. So those are the different good testable questions. So here are different examples of non-testable questions. How do plants grow? This one is very difficult because there's a lot of answers to that. They need water, soil, energy, sunlight. There's a lot. What makes something sink or float? There's a lot of answers to this, so it's not really a testable question. How does rocket work? A lot of answer, very complicated to answer. How does the sun heat up water? Same. So you notice that a testable question, there should be an independent and dependent variable. You have something that you will change and you have something that you will measure. So for example, how does changing the amount of water affect the growth of tomatoes? So your independent variable here is your amount of water, and your dependent variable is the growth of tomatoes. So just look at these examples, and from these examples, you can make your own testable questions. There are different types of question. First is a broad fact question. When you say broad, it's wide. It encompasses a lot of information. So just like what I gave you a while ago, those are really broad questions. So when you say broad questions, example, how many organisms are affected by plastics? So when you say how many organisms are there, right? There are different types of organisms, different types of plastics. So you have to be very specific on what organism is affected but by what specific type of plastic, right? So that's one type of bad scientific question. So you have to rewrite these questions to be a little bit specific. So how many species are found at the polluted plastic present site compared to a non-polluted plastic site? So you can have two comparison so that when you experiment, you look for species in a certain polluted site with plastic, specific type of plastic maybe, or can not, it doesn't really need to be a specific type of plastic, but it should be a specific like it should be a specific area. Kaya lisod baya pud if tanan whole world imuhang i-check, right? So you have to be specific or to limit your study. Next is narrow fact question. If there's too broad, too general, there's also too narrow, meaning it's too specific that it's still difficult to really study. So, for example, what is the weight of a plastic under the bench outside today? Like it's specific. What if there's no plastic in the bench today, right? So it's too specific. You can just get rid of today. You can just get rid of one area, which is the bench, maybe the whole school. So you ask yourself about this. What data would you collect? What would your hypothesis be? So it's really hard to make one guessing what plastic, maybe less than a kilo, because it's too specific. So rewrite a question. If you rewrite this, you're going to have this. What is the weight of plastic found in areas where different classes, freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, eat lunch? Or in our case, a school, what would be the weight of a plastic found in the canteen, different areas or different canteens? Right, we have two canteens, school canteens, right? Asa kaya mas mga hugawan kay nga mga bata pasagad laglabay silang basura. So, next is, what is the weight of plastic found under the bleachers on the home versus visitor sides of the football field? So, compare nimo ang bleachers nga doon sa balay ug sa kanang football field, di ba? You can have two areas compared. Pero di po ka na usar ka buok bench, right? So, daghan gid siya. Diba wala kay makolect ng plastic, then you don't have data. Comparison questions are those questions that compare, but you use vague words like worse or better, which is you are not supposed to use worst or better. So you be very specific, which has higher, what is the effect? For example, is plastic found on a baseball field worse than the plastic found on a football field? How do you know that it's worst? What's the criteria for knowing that it is worse than something, right? Or it's better than something. So you can rewrite this question like Are pieces of all types of plastic more abundant? So you can measure per square meter. How many total pieces of plastics found are recyclable versus non-recyclable? So your dependent variable should be measurable. So meaning you can count, you can measure through ruler, weighing scale, or a stopwatch, anything, or a thermometer. So you have to think that your dependent variable should be measurable. Why questions? Why questions? This is a bad question if you start with a why. So, for example, why is there a trash on the school campus? How will you answer that? There are too many answers to that question because it can be an opinionated. So, restating this, you can ask, how does the percentage of plastic in school campus differ before and after lunch period? So, before period, maybe gamay na siya kag na-collect. But after lunch period, daghan na din kayo. Or if not an event. So, for example, so the situation at school, how many plastics are in the covered court before and after an event? Like an opening program, di ba? After, daghan kay mga basura, kay magbilin-bilin ang mga bata og basura. So, with that, you can just measure. So, here are the different sources of scientific questions. You have your scientific journal, news and magazines, observations. You use your five senses, curiosity, your interest. You can you're curious about something. You want to know about the status of the garbages at school. So that's your interest. Research gaps, practical problems or needs. So let's talk about them one by one. Scientific journals are those researches that are available online. It's like a group or a big data or a big what's this container of all researches. Journal is like you're writing, right? So check the pages of a book. That's a journal publication. And here are you can look to or search the net for scientific journals, and these journals, published journals, are what you should be using when you're writing your research. Dili pwede na mga Wikipedia, mga sa balita, sa mga YouTube no. You have to use journals when you write your research. And you can go to Science Direct, ResearchGate, etc., etc. So news and magazines, so you can use news as a source of idea on what to research or scientific question. So this is quite some interesting information about science. So since we're a scientific research, your topic should be related to science. Observation, so you can look outside your house through your window, um, try to observe, use your five senses and observe things. And maybe you can see something that is unique and you have an interest with, you're curious about. So this is also one way or one source of your scientific question. Research gap. When you say research gap, you say gap, right? There's a space between. So there's a lot of researches done by scientists, but there is really some gap between them that hasn't been done yet. So when you say research gap, these are areas that have not yet been investigated. So meaning, what po siya nabuhat hala. Nalagi ni naka-invent ani, pero wala pa yung naka-invent ani. So that's what you're aiming for. Because when you do research, you have to look for something that is unique, that has been done yet, novel. Research gap refers to such unexplored or underexplained scope or topic that needs further research. That's a research gap. Practical problems or needs. So things that you want to make things easier. So if you go with robotics, what robot can you make to make your life easier? So you can create a robot that make your life easier. So that's something that you can use as a source for your scientific question. Okay, so I hope you get this topic. That's it for today.